For as the light of the morning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, and covereth the whole earth, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Therefore sanctify yourselves, that your minds become single to God, and the days will come that you shall see him. For he will unveil his face unto you, and it shall be in his own time, and in his own way, and according to his own will. This is Unveiling Jesus Christ.
Hello and welcome to Unveiling Jesus Christ. I'm John Cassanet. My last several podcasts have talked about the ministry of the two witnesses who will prophesy and protect Jerusalem against Gentile nations who will tread down the city during the last 42 months or 3.5 years of Armageddon. This period is called the Great Tribulation because death and misery will be the hallmarks of that time, as described by Bruce R. McConkie, saying, "Those with refined senses find it difficult to conceive of the desolation, destruction, and death that will prevail during the final great battles ushering in Christ's reign of peace. So great shall be the slaughter and mass murder, the carnage and gore, the butchery and violent death of warring men, that their decaying bodies shall stop the noses of the passengers, and it shall be a task of mammoth proportions merely to dispose of them." Close quote. In addition to the horrible conditions of war generally, wicked people will try to kill the two witnesses by every means possible, as we shall learn in this podcast and as explained by Elder McConkie, saying, "How will their witness be received by the people? This we do know. It will be with these two witnesses as it was with their Lord some 2 millenniums before. The righteous will believe their words, and the wicked will thirst for their blood." Close quote. So that's what we'll be talking about in today's podcast. The main focus of this discussion will talk about how the two witnesses will protect Jerusalem and guard themselves against their own martyrdom until the end of the Great Tribulation. For the nutshell version of this podcast, you can check out section 173 in my book, found on my website at unveilingjesuschrist.com. So let's begin our discussion with the language found in Revelation 11:5, which states, "And if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth and devoureth their enemies, and if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed." Close quote. Albert Barnes quotes this language and says that this implies that there would be those who would be disposed to injure or wrong them. That is, that they would be liable to persecution. The word will is here more than a mere sign of the future. It denotes intention, purpose, design. If any man wills or purposes to injure them. The word hurt here means to do injury or injustice, and may refer to wrong in any form, whether in respect to their character, opinions, persons, or property. The general sense is that there would be those who would be disposed to do them harm, and we should naturally look for the fulfillment of this in some form of persecution. Close quote. Despite the threats against the two witnesses that will come from both hostile Gentiles and offended Jews, the Lord will miraculously preserve them until their ministry is complete, just like other prophets before them. Richard Draper has said that during the course of their ministry, the two latter-day prophets will be absolutely indestructible. Those who attempt to stop the two witnesses will be smitten, so powerful will be the Spirit of the Lord upon them. One cannot help but be reminded of the time Nephi was so filled with the power of God that had Laman or Lemuel touched them, they would have been consumed. Even after a few days, the residual power of the Spirit remained so strong that Nephi's touch shocked them. Close quote. We see examples of God's protective hand in the case of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were protected against the furnace of Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel was protected in the lion's den. Samuel the Lamanite was protected as he stood upon the walls of Zarahemla and preached to the unrepentant populace of the Nephites. Nephi and Lehi, the sons of Helaman, were protected in the midst of a flaming fire when imprisoned. An angel delivered Peter from prison. The prophet Elijah was preserved against 2 companies of 50 soldiers sent to kill him by Jezebel, the wife of Ahab. He called down fire from heaven to destroy them. The two witnesses will have that same power during the Great Tribulations as Albert Barnes has observed, saying, there may possibly be an allusion here in Revelation 11:5 to 2 Kings 1, verses 10 to 14, where it is said that Elijah commanded the fire to descend from heaven to consume those who were sent to take him. But in that case, Elijah commanded the fire to come from heaven. Here, it proceedeth out of the mouth. The allusion here, therefore, is to the denunciations which they would utter, or the doctrines which they would preach, and which would have the same effect on their enemies as if they breathed forth fire and flame. Close quote. Revelation 11:5 also states that if any man will hurt them, the two witnesses can speak words that will cause the wicked to be consumed by fire. Peter Pett has commented on the fire as a metaphorical power of their words, saying, the mention of pure fire from their mouths is in contrast with the fire, smoke, and brimstone from the mouths of the evil spirits in Revelation 9:14 to 21. What this is promising is that their words will be pure and effective in confounding those who come against them. The repetition stresses the truth and continuity of the promise. There are examples in Acts where the words of strong rebuke led to deaths, and we have already mentioned the case of Elijah. The witnesses certainly need God's protection, for they are against powerful enemies. Close quote. The fire of the two witnesses may come metaphorically out of their mouth, but it literally devoureth their enemies. This is comparable to the sword in Christ's mouth spoken of in Revelation 1:6 and what is described in Jeremiah 5:14, saying, because ye speak this word, behold, I will make my words in thy mouth fire, and this people wood, and it shall devour them. Close quote. The fire in Revelation 11:5 may also refer to the general burning that will accompany the second coming that I talked about in my podcast on December 1st, 2024. 2 Nephi 27:2 predicts that, when that day shall come, they shall be visited of the Lord of hosts with thunder and with earthquake and with a great noise and with storm and with tempest and with the flame of devouring fire. Close quote. This prophecy appears to be repeated in Doctrine and Covenants, section 29:21, saying, and the great and abominable church, which is the whore of all the earth, shall be cast down by devouring fire, according as it is spoken by the mouth of Ezekiel the prophet, who spoke of these things, which have not come to pass, but surely must, as I live, for abominations shall not reign. Close quote. There is, of course, historical precedent for the fiery destruction of specific people at specific times. In Numbers 26:10, it states, for example, that the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up together with Korah, what time the fire devoured 250 men, and they became a sign. Close quote. In Judges 9:20 it states, let fire come out from Abimelech and devour the men of Shechem and the house of Millo, and let fire come out from the men of Shechem and from the house of Millo and devour Abimelech. Close quote. At the time of Christ's crucifixion, fire came down from heaven and consumed many cities on the American continent. Until the two witnesses die a martyr's death, they will have great power to preserve Jerusalem and many of her Jewish inhabitants until the final abominations of desolation that will follow their martyrdom. As long as they live, we are reminded by Donald Perry that the two prophets have threefold power: to shut heaven, to turn waters into blood, and to smite the earth with plagues. But these three are only representative of their powers. They will likely also have power to put at defiance the armies of nations, to divide the earth, to break every band, to stand in the presence of God, to do all things according to his will, according to his command, to subdue principalities and powers, and this by the will of the Son of God. Close quote. Richard Draper has also said that the text of Revelation gives the prophets a twofold ministry. First, they are to hold off the enemy at least for a time, thus helping to preserve the Jews temporally. Second, and more importantly, they are to bear witness to the Jewish people of the reality of Jesus the Messiah. Until they have done this, they are invulnerable. Close quote. The Lord makes the two witnesses invulnerable during the 1260-day period, or 3.5-year ministry, so that their power will be openly on display to unbelieving Jews and hostile Gentile armies who can be saved if they believe the signs and wonders, or be left without excuse in the day of their destruction. Richard Draper talks about the saving aspect of their ministry, saying, "The revelation makes clear the means by which the righteous will be preserved. Human agents with divine power act for God. They are two prophets that are to be raised up to the Jewish nation in the last days, at the time of the restoration, and to prophesy to the Jews after they are gathered and have built the city of Jerusalem in the land of their fathers." Close quote. On the other hand, speaking of unbelieving and unrepentant people that seek the lives of the two witnesses, Revelation 11:5 states that in whatsoever manner the wicked strive to kill the two witnesses, the wicked must in this manner be killed. Philip Schaff explains that in the last half of the verse we have the lex talionis, judgment returning in kind upon the oppressors of the just. These oppressors hurt to the extent of killing, just as the Jews went about to kill Jesus in the days of his flesh. As a consequence, in this manner must they be killed. Close quote. Matthew Poole adds a spiritual dimension to this physical judgment, saying, "If any hurt them, God shall revenge their cause, not only by spiritual, but by temporal judgments, bringing all manner of evils upon their adversaries. They are said to have power to do it, because God will do it in the revenge of the injuries done unto them." Close quote. Many of the wicked gathered to Jerusalem will die by consuming fire at Christ's second coming, as predicted in Malachi 4, verse 1, which states, "For behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly shall be stubble, and the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts." Bruce R. McConkie explains the meaning of this verse, saying, "To the wicked, the second coming will be a great and dreadful day, a day of sorrow and desolation, a day of burning and vengeance, a day of judgment which the wicked shall not abide. For the presence of the Lord shall be as a melting fire that burneth, and as the fire which causeth the waters to boil. O Lord, thou shalt come down to make thy name known to thine adversaries, and all nations shall tremble at thy presence." Close quote. Daniel Ludlow reminds us that in the time of Noah, the wicked were destroyed by a flood. At the second coming of the Messiah, the wicked will be destroyed by fire through burning. Prophets in this dispensation have indicated that the fire which destroys the wicked at the second coming will be as literal as the water which destroyed the wicked in ancient times. Close quote. Richard Draper has a slightly different take on the nature of the fires and burning that will accompany the second coming, saying, "Fire is an active ingredient in the judgments leading to the second coming. However, it is not associated with the fire of the Lord's coming, during which the elements should melt with fervent heat and the earth should be wrapped together as a scroll, and the heavens and the earth should pass away. It precedes it. It has been called the Great Overburn, an apt description of the final Holocaust of Revelation, and has been associated with the last great war before the second coming, a war of a special nature." Elder McConkie has written that these destructions are of such a nature that they, speculatively, could be brought to pass in large part through atomic warfare. It is not described in the usual term of bloodshed and the work of the sword. It is a war of burning in which the people should be as the fuel of the fire." Close quote. If the burning of the wicked at the second coming is a lex talionis, this may suggest that the two witnesses will suffer a martyr's death by fire in the likeness of their assailants. This is the view of some scholars and theologians, such as Albert Barnes, who said, "He must in this manner be killed, that is, in the manner specified, by fire." The meaning is undoubtedly that they would have power to bring down on them divine vengeance or punishment, so that there would be a just retaliation for the wrongs done them. Close quote. We see a similar or analogous situation in the case of the prophet Abinadi from the Book of Mormon, who predicted that the manner of his death would foreshadow the death of his persecutors and murderers, as recorded in Moses chapter 17, verses 14 through 15, saying, "When the flames began to scorch Abinadi, he cried unto them, saying, Behold, even as ye have done unto me, so shall it come to pass that thy seed shall cause that many shall suffer the pains that I do suffer, even the pains of death by fire." Close quote. Alma 25, verses 9 to 12, records the fulfillment of this prophecy, which indicates that King Noah suffered death by fire. I'm not entirely convinced that the two witnesses will suffer death by fire, however, and the manner of their death remains an uncertainty at best. I'm inclined to think that their death may more likely occur as the result of their beheading. I say this because the two witnesses are forerunners of the second coming, which is antitypical of the ministry of John the Baptist as a forerunner for the first coming of Christ. Since John was a type and foreshadow for the two witnesses, and he was beheaded, this may suggest that the two witnesses will die in like manner. Also, I'm generally disinclined to believe that the two witnesses will die by fire, since their dead bodies will lie in the streets for 3.5 days in view of the entire world. The burning of their corpses would be akin to a cremation that tends to contradict the imagery in Revelation 11, verse 7, that I actually will be talking about in more detail during my next podcast. Turning from the question of their death, let's now focus on the power that the two witnesses will possess while they minister for 3.5 years in Jerusalem. This is described in Revelation 11:6, saying, "These have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will." Close quote. To restate this more succinctly, this verse describes the two witnesses as possessors of the sealing power of the priesthood. The power of the two witnesses is the power held by Elijah and Moses, as explained by Bruce R. McConkie, who said, "It will be with them as it was with Elijah, who both called down fire from heaven to consume his enemies, and sealed the heavens that there was neither dew nor rain for 3.5 years. And it will be with them as it was with Moses, who turned the rivers and waters of Egypt into blood, and who smote the Egyptians with many plagues." Close quote. Richard Draper expounds on this same thought somewhat, saying, "The witnesses combined the powers of Moses and Elijah. The latter caused a 3.5 year drought upon Israel, and on 2 occasions fire consumed troops sent to arrest him, while the former held authority over water and brought plagues against Egypt." Close quote. In my prior podcast from September 10 of 2024, I talked about the restoration of the sealing power that Elijah held when he came to the Kirtland Temple on April 3, 1836. By way of a quick reminder, N.B. Lundwall reminds us that Elijah was the last of the old prophets who held the fullness of the priesthood, the sealing power of the priesthood, and being the last of the prophets, it was his place to come, but in order that the binding power should come, which is recognized in the heavens, and by which we pass by the angels and the gods to exaltation, had to come from Elijah, who held that power upon the face of the earth, for the Lord had given it to him. And so he came to Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery on the 3rd day of April and bestowed upon them the keys of this priesthood. Close quote. In addition to Elijah, other ancient prophets have held the sealing power, and it is the same power that the modern apostles now hold. Nephi, the son of Helaman, was given the sealing power because of his diligence in declaring the word of God, such that whatsoever ye shall seal on earth shall be sealed in heaven, and whatsoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Close quote. Christ likewise gave his apostles the same power to bind or seal on earth and in heaven in Matthew 18:18, saying, "Verily I say unto you, whatsoever ye shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Close quote. Moses also possessed the sealing power, as evidenced by the many plagues that he brought upon the ancient Egyptians and the nature of his ministry at Sinai when he sought to bring the Israelites into the presence of God. Bruce R. McConkie has said, all of these ordinances of exaltation are performed in the temples for both the living and the dead. Their essential portions have been the same in all dispensations when the fullness of the sealing power has been exercised by the Lord's prophets. Close quote. The sealing power includes the spiritual keys and authority to seal and putting together husbands and wives in the new and everlasting covenant of marriage, as I discussed in my podcast from August 24 of 2024. Through the sealing power, all earthly generations of parents and children, going back to the time of Adam, will be linked in the patriarchal order of the priesthood, as well as generations of gods throughout time and all eternity. In addition to the spiritual powers to bind and loose in this life and throughout all eternity, the sealing power includes the power to control the physical elements, as Joseph Smith has explained, saying, Elijah was one of the greatest of the prophets, and the Lord conferred upon him the sealing power. He had power to seal and bind, and did exercise authority over the elements as well as over the destinies of man. Close quote. Richard Draper notes that in describing the power possessed by Elijah, which is the same power held by the witnesses, he explained that the noun in Greek is used to describe the prophet's power. The word denotes the power to both command and control and carries the nuance of absolute power and authority. Close quote. At the start of their 3.5-year ministry, the two witnesses will use the sealing power to shut heaven that it rain not in the days of their prophecy. Elijah, of course, brought a similar curse of drought upon the same land in his day, which was a time of great idolatry and wickedness brought about by King Ahab and his Phoenician bride named Jezebel, whom I discuss in my podcast from March 10 of 2024. Joseph Seiss connects the analogous conditions of the past with the antitypical future, saying, "It is for the great sin of idol worship, trust in false gods, and sacrilegious desecration of God's temple that this shutting off of rain is the special penalty. The shutting of the heaven tells of infamous idolatry, false confidence, and defilement of the temple, and the infliction of this particular chastisement by these witnesses likewise tells of efforts on their part to set on foot again the true worship of Jehovah in his own chosen house." Close quote. The drought caused by the two witnesses may be restricted to the area where they minister, but broad enough in effect to mirror the 3.5-year drought caused by Elijah in the days of Ahab and Jezebel. Richard Draper examines the nature of this drought from the standpoint of wicked people rather than a specific geographical area, saying, "Thus, a portion of their power parallels that of Elijah in that they are able to prevent rain from falling. Nephi, the son of Helaman, used the priesthood power that God gave him to seal up the heavens so that it would not rain for a period in Helaman 10:7 and 11:4. If this were to last for years, famine would result. The effect of that plague, however, seems limited to the enemy army, not the people of God." Close quote. I agree with Brother Draper that the effect of the plague will be limited to the enemy arrayed against the Jews and Jerusalem, and not to the people of God, specifically those in the land of Zion. I think I can say with some confidence that the drought will not be a worldwide phenomenon, because in the same 3.5-year period when the two witnesses seal up the heavens during the Great Tribulation, on the American continent, the people of Zion will build the New Jerusalem and her temple, and they will be a blessed people. Thus, the comments of Richard Draper certainly seem valid, although I'm pretty sure that the rain versus drought is not a pure black and white line drawn between righteous and wicked people. David Galbraith also addresses the nature of the drought that the two witnesses will cause. He makes an interesting comparison between the amount of rainfall in Jerusalem and London. I know you're already thinking that London has a lot more rain than Jerusalem, but listen to his description of the actual amounts when he said, "Consider also the prophetic future when 2 witnesses in the holy city will be empowered to shut the heaven that it rain not for a period of 3.5 years. Jerusalem actually has about the same annual average rainfall as London, 22 to 25 inches. In Jerusalem, however, the rain falls over a period of about 50 days, whereas in London it falls over a period of about 300 days." Close quote. I'm not really sure that this information about London has much bearing on the drought in Jerusalem, except to say that when the 2 witnesses begin their ministry in the spring of the year, their first order of business apparently will be to seal the heavens so that there will be no rain during the 50 or so days when it normally falls in that year. So when the 2 witnesses begin their ministry, it's already like it's been a year already since the rainy season. And now all of a sudden in the spring when they begin their ministry, hey, there's no rain. Therefore, when they withhold the 25 inches of rain in that first 50 days or so of their ministry, including what I would assume would be those high mountain terrains in the watersheds that flow into the rivers in Israel, there will already be drought conditions in the first summer of their ministry. So that's just some food for thought at the start of famine conditions during the Great Tribulation. In addition to drought, the 2 witnesses will use their sealing power over the waters to turn them to blood as Moses did in Egypt. Commenting on this aspect of their power, Joseph Seiss said, "One of the great plagues which Moses brought upon Egypt was the turning of the waters into blood. It was an infliction particularly related to the bloody and oppressive tyranny which had been enacted against God's people. In like manner, these witnesses have power upon the waters to turn them to blood. The thing having been done once, there is nothing to hinder it from being done again. And as oppression, persecution, and wholesale murder were the particular forms of sin which brought this plague in the days of Moses, its recurrence here tells of similar transgression and shows further against what the endeavors of these witnesses are directed." Close quote. Notice the pervasive nature of this particular plague when pronounced by Moses on the streams, rivers, ponds, pools of water, and even in the vessels that held the water of the Egyptians, as stated in Exodus 7, verses 19 to 21, saying, "Take thy rod and stretch out thy hand upon the waters of Egypt, upon their streams, upon their rivers, and upon their ponds, and upon all their pools of water, that they may become blood, that there may be blood throughout the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone." And Moses and Aaron did so, as the Lord commanded, and he lifted up the rod and smote the waters that were in the river in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, and all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. And the fish that was in the river died, and the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink of the water of the river, and there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. Close quote. Some may question whether the 2 witnesses will use the sealing power to literally turn water into blood, but we need not question whether this is the case or not. The nature of their miracle and their plague will be just as literal as the miracle and plague performed by Moses. It will be just as miraculous as Christ turning water into wine at Cana. We should not doubt that the Lord can perform miracles today and during the Great Tribulation, just as he did in the days of past prophets. Moses pronounced 10 plagues on Egypt. The number 10 symbolizes the whole of a part to represent a complete portion of God's wrath, as I explained in my podcast from October 29 of 2023. We're told in Revelation 11:6 that the 2 witnesses, by contrast, will have power to smite the earth with all plagues, which Albert Barnes comments on, saying, "All kinds of plague or calamity, disease, pestilence, famine, flood, etc." The word plague, which means properly stroke, stripe, blow would include any or all of these. The meaning here is that the great calamities would follow the manner in which the two witnesses were treated, as if the power were lodged in their hands. Close quote. The power to smite the earth with all plagues suggests that the miracles of the two witnesses will actually exceed even those of Elijah or Moses. Speaking of this power, Richard Draper has said, "Their might combines that of Enoch, Moses, and Elijah, three of the greatest Old Testament prophets. Thus, they have overwhelming power. Because the powers of these prophets are like those of Moses, Enoch, and Elijah, some commentators have suggested that John felt they would be returning. Early documents show that certain Jews and Christians did believe that these prophets and others would return. Modern commentators have also viewed the two prophets in Revelation as a return of these ancient ones." Close quote. I think I've made it pretty clear in my prior podcast that these two witnesses are not Moses and Elijah, neither are they the prophet Enoch, despite what some ancient and modern commentators have said on this subject. We're told in the same verse that the two witnesses can invoke the sealing powers against the wicked to perform all plagues as often as they will. Philip Schaff comments on this aspect of their continuing power, saying, "The allusions are obviously to Elijah and Moses, but the power of the witness is described in language far stronger than that of the Old Testament. For 3.5 years only was rain kept back by Elijah. The witnesses have power to withhold it during the whole time of their prophecy. Moses had control over the waters of Egypt, they over all waters. The plagues with which Moses could smite were definite in number and limited in range. The witnesses may smite the whole earth with every plague as often as they desire." Close quote. Needless to say, the fact that the two witnesses possess the sealing power to perform all plagues as often as they will makes you want to have these guys in your corner during the Great Tribulation. And we might ask, why do they have such great power, even to exceed the powers of Moses and Elijah and perhaps even Enoch? Just remember, there is always an equal and opposite power that exists in the earth, and if the two witnesses possess this great power, it is only because it counteracts the power and influence of Satan and his satanic hosts that will be the engine driving the Gentile armies in the last half of the Battle of Armageddon, as I discuss in my podcast from February 11 of 2025. So that concludes my podcast for today. In my next podcast, I'll talk about the death of the two witnesses at the end of their 3.5-year ministry as described by John in Revelation 11:7. So until then, thanks for watching, listening, sharing, and subscribing, and many thanks to Jen and Kristen for their technical help. I'll see you next time on Unveiling Jesus Christ.